Hello, my name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the Attitude team, I'm so pleased to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled Getting Things Done at Work with ADHD, How to Set Expectations, Meet Deadlines, and Increase Productivity. Leading today's presentation is Linda Walker. Linda is a professional certified coach, helping entrepreneurs and professionals with ADHD shift from a life of chaos and overwhelm to productivity and control. Her unique strategies, tools, and approaches have empowered hundreds of neurodivergent entrepreneurs, professionals, and other creative geniuses. Since 2005, Linda has created programs combining group coaching, online training, and community to address challenges with productivity for people with ADHD. She's the author of With Time to Spare, the ultimate guide to peak performance for entrepreneurs, adults with ADHD, and other creative geniuses. You can get your copy of the top 3 creative genius productivity hacks and stay informed about her next free online workshop at www.creativegeniusreport.com. In today's webinar, we will specifically be discussing getting things done on the job with ADHD. As you know, executive dysfunction goes hand in hand with ADHD. Today, we will discuss techniques to help you stay focused, be productive, meet your deadlines, and communicate effectively and with authority. That is a lot to cover. But we'd like to begin today's webinar by asking you a question. So to our live audience, please tell us which of the following is your biggest ADHD-related challenge at work. You can select your answers, and you can also comment in the text box under the video player to tell us more about your challenges. You can see the poll results as soon as you submit your response, and then we'll share a little more insight before our Q&A session. So while you all are doing that, I'll point out just a few things. As I said, you can submit questions at any time during the event under the video player. You can also download the slides. Just click on the event resources section of your webinar screen to do that. And if you are interested in the certificate of attendance option, look for instructions in an email you will receive about an hour after the live broadcast. We will also make available a transcript of today's event. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, just visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 431 to access the slides, webinar replay, certificate of attendance, and transcript. If you support the work we're doing at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude magazine for yourself, your family, or perhaps a loved one this holiday season who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. Finally, the sponsor of today's webinar is Play Attention, Improve Executive Function and Self-Regulation. For more than 25 years, Play Attention has been helping children and adults thrive and succeed. Tufts University School of Medicine found Play Attention significantly improved attention, executive function, academic performance, and behavioral control of ADHD students. Your program will include a lifetime membership and a personal executive function coach to customize your plan along the way. Home and professional programs are available. You can call 828-676-2240 or click the link on your screen to schedule your free one-on-one consultation. Visit www.playattention.com to learn more. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without any further ado, Linda, thank you so much for joining us today and for leading this really important discussion on getting things done.
Awesome. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for being here, all of you who have decided to take that time to do this, to look at this. So today I'm going to show you really to start a three-step process or approach to managing some of the biggest pitfalls of ADHD at work, and then we're going to apply them to 4 different areas that tend to be a major challenge for people with attention deficit disorder. So that 3-step approach is prepare, plan, and perform. And I'm going to go through each one with a little bit more details. There's going to be a more generic version of that. And then we'll look at those 4 different areas and apply even further information for that. So let's look at these. Step 1 of prepare. This is something that most creative geniuses don't do a whole lot of. We tend to have an idea and then we want to jump and do it right away. Now, prepare means really starting off by looking at, are there any routines or systems that we can put in place? Those would be checklists, storyboards. That could be things like mind maps, whatever works for you. It could be a list of questions if you're often assigned the same thing over and over again, and there's a number of different parameters or information that you need to be able to do your work. Having that list of questions when you go in and receive an assignment means that you're not going to miss any details. And scripts, I love scripts. I think most of us really need to do that. I know I'm not someone who thinks quick on the fly, so I like having a script when it's something that's going to be challenging for me. And you want to document these and have the documentation put somewhere where you're not gonna lose it. I use Evernote. That's my area, but one of my systems, but you could use whatever system works for you. You want to document all of these different systems. That's a way to prepare, and it reduces the amount of energy that you deploy with your prefrontal cortex, your executive functions, leaving you more energy for the really big thinking. The second step, as I mentioned before, is planning. So in every single situation, planning becomes important. You need to have clear, specific tasks, not projects, but tasks. So you're not writing a book, you're writing the first paragraph of the first chapter, for example. You want to have these tasks plotted in a calendar. A lot of us use to-do lists, and to-do lists are very unrealistic. Most of us end up having to-do lists that are to-do books, and we're really not being realistic. When you plot it in your calendar, then you become more aware of the amount of time that you actually do have left to accomplish anything, but also you're more, you gain some knowledge, you become more aware of how long it actually took the last time, especially if afterwards you track that. You want to include transition time. So you might think it's an hour, but it's probably going to be a lot more than that. If you use transition is a natural thing that happens between tasks. You stop thinking about the last task that you were doing and you get on and prepare for the next one. That transition is often forgotten, and it's really important to include it. You want to also use a catch-all list. So the catch-all list is a place where you capture all of the thoughts that you might have while you're doing the work that you had planned to do. So those are the intruding thoughts, like, oh my gosh, I forgot to do this. Instead of going to do it, write it down and get back to work. Okay, so the catch-all list is very helpful. Somebody stops you in the middle of your work, you can use your catch-all list to look at, to take note of it and then go back to work. That's the main step. And then you don't want to forget to plan some time to review your catch-all list, either at the end of your planned tasks or at the end of the day, depends. And I've had some clients who, after a while, they only plan one a week because they're so well, their projects are so well managed that they don't have these, oh my gosh, I forgot that. And you want to identify and manage possible obstacles ahead of time. Studies show that when you do that, you are much more likely to get things done because now you're ready for those obstacles. You have a plan and you don't get completely sidetracked by those obstacles. Then prepare, or perform, I should say. So performing requires, of course, you've plotted everything in your calendar. Now you need to check your calendar. And that may mean looking at your calendar on, getting into the habit of looking at your calendar on a regular basis. And if there's anything that you could do to start any sort of habit that's going to support you, it's checking your calendar regularly to see what did I have set up for today. I check mine in the morning. I check it after every task that I've completed, and at the end of the day, so that I'm ready for the next day if there's anything I need to prepare ahead of time. Then you want to do what you say you were going to do. You want to do what you plan. Now, I know that's not always easy to do. There's all kinds of emergencies that happen and so on. I'll talk about that later when we're talking about ways to be more productive. And of course, it's a good idea to to stay on track. I use my phone all the time to track me, or you can use something, I don't know if you could see it, but I've got a little one of these timers that show how much time I've got left. So that could be extremely helpful for us timeline people. So let's look at those that three-step approach for setting expectations. So what would that look like? So I had talked about prepare in a more generic view. Now we're going to be, that is true, but you're also going to add this. So if setting expectations, if there's a routine for that, you use that, but we're also going to do some more stuff that's more specific to setting expectations. And it starts with being clear about expectations. So many people are not really clear about what they need to do. And I mentioned before having a list of questions, if there's tasks that you do often. An example of that, I'm often asked to speak. Before I say yes, I have a number of questions. Okay, so what type of format are we talking? A presentation, workshop, an interview, a panel? What's the length of the presentation? What's the logistics, the audience, the subject that you want me to speak about? I have those questions, and then I document them because I will forget. I had somebody in May who hired me for next May. I would never have remembered what my presentation for them is going to be and what they wanted me to touch on. So I've documented it and I've put it in my system so that I don't forget. And of course, you want to double check your understanding of expectations. So again, I spoke about scripts. Here's a script in the little blue box that you see there. So what you want me to prepare for you is a pie chart of the clinical whatever for the following dates, and you want it done by this time. Is that correct? And that way you're always sure that you've clarified the expectations and they know exactly, what you need to do, and they do as well. Next, of course, is planning. So before you accept, you don't plan, you don't say yes right away, even if it's a boss, if it's a client. I've had clients to whom I've said no just because there was no way I could perform it. I haven't said no, I didn't say no right away, but before I said yes, and before you say yes, you need to first give yourself some time to think. So using a script, you could say something like, okay, let me check my projects before I commit to this because I want to make sure I meet your timelines. And then you go and you review your current projects and to make sure that you can fit it in. And then you return. Don't be shy to return and ask for questions. I've had so many people who were too shy to go back and get more information about something that they missed. Okay, and as a result, because they think that's not normal to have that type of expectation. So it's okay to ask more questions. You asked for this, but I want to make sure that it's this, and how precise do you want it to be, or whatever. And you may have to negotiate timelines, even with your boss. You may have to reprioritize your current projects if this project is more important than the other ones. So that's the planning part. Now, let's say you've actually said yes. You've decided you are going to accept this project. Now it's time to perform. So how do you do that? You want to first make sure that you don't overpromise. You don't promise more. I know we get so excited about projects and we're thinking about the possibilities and we get into adding more and more, and you don't want to do that. Okay, so it's better to underpromise and then over deliver. And if there's a possible issue, you may want to address that ahead of time. Say, I'm thinking the timelines will be okay as long as this doesn't happen. And if it does, I'll let you know. Okay. The other step is, of course, to plan regular check-ins. So a lot of people with ADHD will wait till the last minute to do anything. So let's say if I meet my client, and I'm saying I've got client in brackets because where I used to work, in quotes, I mean, where I used to work, client was also an internal client. So people I worked with, they were clients. So your team, your boss, your client have regular check-ins. These become these mini deadlines. And they kind of force you to continue to make progress in your project if it's something that you have a tendency to procrastinate. You also will want to communicate any unexpected events that happen and offer some contingency plans that can happen, and there's nothing you could do about it, but you could be communicative about it. So what about now? I've set expectations. Now it's time for me to meet deadlines. So let's look at what that looks like. So meeting deadlines, of course, starts with having, in the prepare part, having a consistent planning process that doesn't have any holes. And the planning process is for planning your projects and tasks and all of this, but also to capture things that are assigned to you in meetings. I've noticed that we have so many meetings nowadays, and a lot of the tasks that are assigned to us are assigned during meetings. We need to take responsibility for capturing that. So having a system to capture that, the things that we are responsible for, don't wait for meeting notes or the minutes of the meeting, because that may happen. You may get them the day before the next meeting, and oops, you're in trouble. And then you want to give yourself or make an appointment with yourself with a post-meeting planning. So that will help in allowing you to, after a meeting, you stop, you look at, and maybe it's not right after the meeting if you've got back-to-back, but you want to schedule some time for yourself to look at what are the things that have been assigned to you and capture them in your project planning system so that you don't miss anything. And if you need to schedule something this week, then you're not doing it at the last minute. And you want to create an interruption-free zone. And that starts, you prepare for that by eliminating any distractions that could stop you. If you've got a lot of stuff on your desk and it's distracting you, you may want to put it in a box and put an appointment with yourself to look in the box and make sure you don't miss anything, but also communicate the periods of uninterrupted times with others in your team. So you might say, hey, I'm struggling to stay focused because we're constantly interrupting each other. During this time and this time, I want to try to work uninterrupted. If you have any questions, blah, 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 can you come at another time? Okay. So having a script that stops interrupters, because you might communicate in advance, but maybe some interrupters show up anyways, and say, oh, I'd love to, a script would look like, oh, I'd love to talk to you right now, but I'm really focused on this project and I don't want to lose the flow. Can we talk? And then you give them a time when you can meet. Okay. You need to prepare those things ahead of time. Your scripts, the periods when you want to be uninterrupted and communicated with people, and those distractions. So now let's talk about planning those meetings to meet your deadlines. So it starts with planning projects. So planning projects, instead of planning by to-dos, is a better way because it allows you to see the big picture. Creative geniuses, people with ADHD, are big picture thinkers, and you need to see all of the different projects that you've got going to be able to make the best decisions. And you do that ideally once a week, because that could be a little bit long if you do it every day. So you plan by project instead. If you have large projects, you will want to break them down into milestones. So a milestone is a natural part of a project. So for example, if you're asked to deliver a training to a group, you might have as a milestone get a needs analysis, maybe create an outline for the training, possibly writing the training, preparing documentation, and then actually delivering the training. So those would be milestones. And you don't develop every milestone for big projects because it could take a very long time. You'll want to develop the first few tasks that you have to do. Again, you want to plan regular check-ins with the supervisor, the client, or your team if you've got a team going in this particular project to meet that deadline. You want to secure needed resources that are for future tasks ahead of time. Even if you're not going to be doing something in milestone number 6 until 3 months from now, you may need to secure some resources. I got the front of my house all redone a few years ago, and I needed to hire 4 different contractors, and nobody would talk to each other. So I had to secure all of these resources ahead of time and communicate with them so that I was sure that once the first one's done, the second one is ready to get started, and so on. So it doesn't drag out for 2 years instead of the few months or the few weeks really that it took. You also want to identify only the tasks that need to be done in the next week. And if you're looking at each of your projects, you're identifying usually 1 to 3 significant tasks per project that you're going to do each week so that you continue to make progress in every single project that you have. Then you want to plot them in your calendar, and you use time boxing. Time boxing is an approach where you determine the beginning and the end of your task. And that makes it a lot easier to be clear on what's realistic and what's not. So when it comes to performing to meet deadlines, of course, you're going to have to look at your calendar and you're going to have to follow your plan, which is not easy to do. So if, for example, you end up scheduling an hour to do something and whoops, an hour later, you realize that it's probably going to take another hour, you need to then reschedule the extra time that you're going to need somewhere in your calendar. You also need to get into the habit of performing to the minimum acceptable standard. That's not sloppy work. It's not shoddy work. It's only perform what they asked for. If by any chance you finish all of your project, all of your tasks, and you want to add more, then okay. If there's things that excite you and you've got some great ideas for things that you could add to the project, put them aside, write them down, and maybe propose them when you are providing the end, when you're reporting back to your whole project, when your project is over. And that way, maybe they'll hire you for the next thing. You want to aim for excellence, not perfection. Perfection isn't real. There is no such thing as perfection. Only, our higher power is perfect. We are not. So we need to stop believing that that's going to be possible. And to get from 0 to 80% perfect, which I call excellence, takes as much time as getting from that 80% to what you think is going to be 100, but it never is. It takes as much time. So you're taking double the amount of time required to do a particular project, and you could be moving on to other things. This is keeping you from your life, because you're working longer to complete projects that nobody asks you to make it excellent. People will be happy with. They won't notice the difference between excellent and perfect. And communicate with the team, with the client, communicate and use bulleted lists. It could be either you meet on a weekly basis to let them know where the project stands, or maybe you send an email at the end of the week and say, here are the tasks that have been done. Here's what we're waiting for. Here are the next steps. That helps people recognize that there is some progress going on, because often our bosses have no idea what we do and what we don't do, and if we don't communicate it. So now we've dealt with meeting deadlines. We do have to communicate, and communication is a big subject. It's a big one that can be challenging. So what does communicating effectively mean? It's not verbal diarrhea. That's not communicating effectively. It is, communicating a message that is clear to the audience, that the audience can pay attention to, and that everybody's ready to listen, you included. So how do you prepare for this kind of communication to be effective in your communication? Well, you start with being clear on what the message is, or what's the key takeaway from your communication. Do you want to inform them about the project status? Is it a change or a problem? Is it something else? Okay, so you want to be clear on what that is. You want to then make sure that you have a clear call to action. Now, call to action is a marketing term that we use to say, what do you want people to do with the information that you're going to provide them when you're communicating? Do you want them to, to make a decision, to provide information, maybe to solve the problem or to take action? What is it that you need for them to do? Who are the people who are going to need to be involved and communicated to, and what do they already know, and making sure that you only provide what they need to know. There's nothing more irritating than being told something you already know well because it's part of your expertise, for example, and it's verbal diarrhea. That's not necessary. I apologize for the term, but I think it's a great term for what we sometimes do, especially as verbal processors. So planning communication. So we prepared by being clear on what we need to communicate. Now we're planning. So what is the best channel of communication for the message? Is it an email? Do we need a meeting? Do we need to call? What is it? Prepare a bulleted summary of what they need to know. People don't have time to read chapters or, even paragraphs and paragraphs of stuff. We don't have time to take a longer route than what we need. And if you have a tendency to diverge from what you were planning to say, having a bulleted summary of what you want to say can be extremely helpful. And what do they need to know? And you may want to prepare an agenda if we're talking about a meeting. So you'll need to plan that. Next is the call to action. You want to make sure that you clarify that in whatever communication. So what is it? Are there any options that you could provide them or solutions that you can propose? And ideally, you want to number those because it makes it a lot easier for people to then respond. Especially if we're talking about an email communication or a text. Plan for objections and questions. It's objections, questions, concerns, or whatever. Often we gather a group of people that have different challenges in their work, and if we're not ready to prepare, if we're not ready to answer those questions or objections, it's going to take longer to make decisions. It's going to take longer to communicate. So plan for those. You may want to say, okay, so what are some of the objections or the concerns that each member might have, or the questions? Is there a way that I can answer that? Is there some statistics that I could provide or some information that I could provide that would be helpful? Okay, and that means then you may also you'll need to bring that information with you if you're having a meeting. So when it comes to two-way communication, when you're having a meeting, we're still in the plan phase. Like I said, communicating effectively is a big one. You may want to create and select the best condition. Well, not you may, you need to create and select the best conditions for you to stay focused on the conversation. So this is something that most people really struggle with. When are you, in your day, when are you able to stay focused and not necessarily focused for a long period of time, but focused enough that you can have a conversation? There are times in our day when we are totally wiped. Those are not great times to have meetings. Those are times that if you have meetings and things get emotional, you will lose your cool. Okay, and you can actually hurt your reputation more than anything else. So you want to identify that. You want to be away from distractions. You don't want a meeting where there's TVs everywhere in the restaurant type of thing, or So having the best conditions is incredibly helpful. Then you need to be ready, plan for what if the conversation gets to be negative, and you get those negative emotions. Someone is not getting what you're saying, and they're getting annoying, and they're asking stupid I'll say stupid questions. There are no stupid questions, but you're going to lose your cool. Well, you need to plan ahead of time, because losing your cool can actually hurt your reputation, hurt your who you are and the way you're seen. So have an approach. So what I put in 2 different approaches here, but I know you probably have others. So when it's getting a little bit hot under the collar, you might use a script like, can we take a break? I need a moment. Or can we take a break so we could cool down and think about what's going on here, or some of the challenges that people are having. Take 3 deep breaths. That's a way to calm down. It actually changes the physiology of your body to take those 3 deep breaths. So those are approaches. There may be others, and if you have any others, write them down. We love to hear. I love to hear what you guys have to say, and I know the group here also does, because you are creative and you come up with a lot of great ideas. Now it's time to perform, and I'm gonna show you perform for written communication and then in meetings. Written communication, I've studied a lot on written communications because it is the thing that drives me the most nuts. I get so many emails. It's very difficult to respond to everything and so on. Finding a way to manage emails and so on is challenging. So one way you can have templates where for things that you often respond to. It's a good idea if you're going to send an email to have a very clear subject. And ideally, your subject includes the subject itself, a very clear idea. If there's a call to action, you want to put it in large, in caps, in a square bracket. And I would put that at the beginning, if there's any. And then the deadline. So in the blue box here, you see subject, decision required, project ABC, supplier decision by such and such a date, such and such a time. Those types of communications are opened a lot more quickly. Okay, studies have shown that if it's really clear what the subject is, and you're able to have a clear call to action, people are much more likely to open your communication. Then you want to write, and then you want them to open it, and then you want them to read it. Okay, so you want to write succinctly, starting with the call to action. So I'm sending you this because we need to make a decision about such and such, and then only provide the relevant information. Some researchers say, ideally you want to go five sentences or less, but of course, that's not always easy to do. You want to only manage one subject at a time. So if there's several projects that are involved in, you want a separate email for each one. And then use images whenever possible. I also feel, and that's not just me, if you look at your own behavior when it comes to email or websites, studies have shown that people scan. They don't read through and through until they know that it's something they want to see. So making your email scannable, you make it scannable when you're putting bullet points, when you're using subheadings, bold letters, or highlights. You're leaving enough white space, and numbering options, for example. I often get these large emails. They're these paragraphs and paragraphs of people just telling me whatever, and then there's no call to action. I have no idea what to do with it. I don't read it right away, because to me, I don't have the time to go and decipher everything. And I'm not the only one. I know it's like that for everyone. So I mentioned before, communicating works when people are able to listen, when your audience is able to listen. They won't be if you write them chapters for each of the things that you want to tell them. Now, how do you perform when it's a two-way communication? You start with coming ready. coming to the meeting ready, and that's ready with your notes, that list of that bulleted list of things that you had planned to do. The agenda, ideally timed. So for example, I'm going to spend 2 minutes on this. I'm going to spend 5 minutes on that, 15 minutes to discuss, and 10 minutes to make a decision and determine the next steps, for example. That way, you're more likely to stay on task, all of you. You want to lead with call to action, unless it's a surprise, but I usually people like to know you're priming them when you tell them why you're meeting. Ideally, you would have said that anyways when you invited them, but you prime them so that they're ready to engage. Oh, now I get it. We need to make a decision, so I need to pay attention to a few things. Provide only the relevant information. And we know that communication doesn't happen if people are not listening anymore. And when you're talking and going on tangents, people eventually, I've seen it myself. I went to a networking, one of my first networking events when I was a young coach, and I'm talking about my business. Of course, because I'm so excited about it, I went on and on and on. And I saw this girl's eyes just go glaze over. And then she said, oh, I see somebody over there. And she left. So I got the message. I realized that I was talking too much. And I just needed to say enough that if she's curious, she'll ask or say something. And that's the next step, is be curious, listen. Don't think about your next reply. Listen to what the other person is saying. Clarify with questions if you're not 100% sure about what they're saying. And then take notes of decisions, next steps, record who needs to do it. You could record the session as well. There's now some technology that actually does an okay job, a pretty good job of transcribing your sessions if you're not someone who's an auditory person. So otter.ia is one of them, and that could be incredibly helpful. Next, one thing that I mentioned before when I said listen, don't think about your response. What that means, though, is you may not necessarily, obviously, you didn't think of your response. Now it's time for you to respond. And a lot of people would just say whatever comes up because they're nervous and then they think I should have a response right away. You can pause. It's totally okay. Say something like, that's a good point. Give me a moment to think about that. And now you're giving yourself that time. And it doesn't sound wrong, and you wouldn't be the only person doing that. I think it tells the other person that you care enough that you want to take the time to think about it before you respond. Ask for specific examples if you need to, and that's true if you have when you're seeing your boss for your annual performance period. Ask for specific examples of what they're saying. Paraphrase. So paraphrasing is not, regurgitating exactly what the person has said, but telling them what you understood of what they said. And so that you can verify. Paraphrasing would look, okay, so what I understand, what you're saying is your concern is this, and da da da. Is that correct? And that way, you're sure that you are not saying something that's out of context. Now, increasing productivity. A lot of people really, really struggle with that. And everything that we've talked about up to date will help you do that, okay? You increase productivity when you're clear about your expectations and when you're able to plan and manage your everything that you need to do. But here are a few other things that you need to consider. In the prepare stage of increasing productivity, one thing that you need to know is you will be as productive as your brain allows you to be. So what that means is you have to practice extreme self-care. You need to optimize your executive functions. That's a part of your brain that is responsible for, thinking. It's your real thinking brain, your thinking brain. This is where you focus. This is a part of the brain that helps you focus, gets you into action, gets you involved with decision-making and so on. So you need to optimize your executive functions with good lifestyle. And I'm sure you've heard that before, sleep, physical activity, having stress reduction every day. You need some downtime, it could be taking a walk in nature, and nutrition, reducing simple carbs. I know that sounds trite, and I know it's not easy to do. You can't do it all at once if you're really not someone who takes care of their brain. But I want you to recognize that you have a creative genius brain. If you took care of it, it would optimize. It would be optimized, and you would be more productive, and you would have more time after that to spend with family and so on. So create routines, and then you're going to need to create routines and habits to reduce decision fatigue. Decision fatigue happens when you're making many, many decisions. And sometimes we make decisions over mundane things that we should have decided on once and for all. So you want to solve your problems once and for all by creating routines. So if the word routine irks you, consider it rituals, for example. So instead of routines, if that's a word that has a negative connotation, think of a ritual. And habits are rituals that are repeated over and over again. What that happens, or what that does, is that it reduces the amount of decisions that you have to make over, should I check my email right now? Or, oh, maybe later. No, I've made a decision that I'm only checking email at certain times in the day. I'm shutting off my email in the meantime so that I can focus on the work that I need to do. Sorry about that. I'm telling myself that it's time to start cluing up. So you want to reduce decision fatigue with rituals. I've actually got a program that I'm going to offer for free. It's usually a paid program, but at the end of the session, I'm going to give you a code and you can actually access it to help you with ADHD, creative ADHD lifestyles that using habits. You want to build awareness around your unique energy patterns. We have periods in our day when we are more focused than others, periods in our day when we are deeply exhausted. Our brains can't take anymore. If you recognize when those happen and you match your tasks to the right time of the day. For example, I do most of my writing and really heavy mental work in the morning because that tends to be it's my unique, my period, what I call my genius zone. It's a period of my day when I can focus really well, especially if I took care of my brain. So knowing those takes you noticing them. And it takes, I actually created a course on how to do that, but you can probably figure out a way to do it. And in January, I'm going to be giving a webinar that explains a little bit about how to do that, even some more knowledge about it. And then you want to manage your environment always. The environment always wins. So if you don't manage it, it will take over. It will win and you will lose. So you want to reduce distractions and interruptions as much as possible. Now, increasing productivity, you start with plotting, of course, everything in your calendar. We've talked about that before. And everything means also all of your self-care and recurring tasks. So if you have a report you have to do every Friday for your boss, you write that down. You put it in your calendar as a recurring task. You want to also set it up so that all of these follow your energy patterns. So when I'm most focused, that's when I do my highly focused work. When I'm more, physically active, that's when I might do some of the shorter tasks, email responses, and so on. All tasks, you want to put all of your tasks in your calendar, and you want to describe them precisely. It's not about writing a book, like I said before. It's about writing maybe the first paragraph of the first chapter, or maybe preparing the outline of the first, or maybe brainstorming what you're going to have in your book, for example. So you have to be really precise. If you have a task that you find really challenging, that either it's boring or you're going to have a hard time getting yourself started because you don't know where to start. Often when we don't know how to start, it's often because it's not a task. It's really more of I knew that was going on. I got a lot of buzzers, eh? But starting with a task that leads into that particular task. Okay, so if I'm writing a report, let's say I have to write a report, a status report, So maybe a task that precedes it is opening my Microsoft Word. So in my description of my task, I might have open Microsoft and open my status report template as an example. Those things, I'm not doing any more than that, but just opening those will lead into completing that task. You want to manage obstacles with productivity with firewalls and buffer time. So firewalls are periods in your day when you will accept people coming in and interrupting you. When I was working my old job, I instituted firewalls at the end of my morning and at the end of the day. And outside of that, I asked people not to interrupt me. Keep your questions. If there were some people that I had to deal with every single day, we would set up a meeting, but outside of my brain time, my genius zone. Buffer times are short periods between your tasks. So maybe it's 15 minutes that you allot between tasks to manage fires, because there's a lot of those that are happening in the way that we do business nowadays. Everything is always on fire. And especially if you're not great at planning, you may have missed a few things. So that the buffer time will help catch up. Then in the perform part, there are so many different strategies that I could be giving you or telling you about, but there's just not enough time to make it worth your while to I can't tell you all enough about them to make them interesting and useful. So one way is using momentum. So momentum, especially if you're dealing with a task that you don't particularly enjoy, you want to start with a short task before that gives you a boost of energy. And then as soon as your brain is awake, jump into the task that you find maybe more challenging. The other thing that you could do is inject interest, novelty, competition, urgency. So interest might be looking for a particular bit of information. Novelty could be maybe doing it somewhere like I like in the summer to work outside on my patio. It's a different place and it's a lovely place. And I find that I work really well there. Competition could be with the time and so on. And then I'm not sure, some of you probably have used this already, but body doubling is incredibly useful. Body doubling is you meet with one other or more people. You don't have to be in the same physical space to do body doubling. You can actually be doing it on the phone. You could do it on video chat. They don't even have to be from your office, for example. So you decide from this time to this time, let's body double. You meet on the hour, for example, and each one decides, I'm going to be working on this. I'll work on that and so on. And then you put yourself on mute and you start working. At the end of that hour, you report back as to what you did. Everybody celebrates. You need those dopamine hits. And if you want to continue, you extend it by saying, okay, then in the next hour, I'm going to work on this. It is incredibly helpful and it makes a huge difference. So I spoke to you before about the course that is on routines, how to create rituals and habits that support you. That's the Your Path Forward program. It's at adultadhdsolutions.com. It is usually a $77 program, but if you use the code ADHD at work all together in lowercase, you will get it for free. So you'll sign up. You do as if you're going to purchase it. There's going to be a first window and then a second window opens and there's a link, got a code. You click on that and you put that code in and it'll automatically put the price down to $0. And then there's the top 3 productivity hacks that I'm offering. We were having an issue just before I just launched today my brand new website. And of course, when you're launching a brand new website, there's always some challenge that shows up. So that report is on the website, but and I suspect my assistant has probably managed it by now. But Creative Genius Report. If you have any challenges, don't worry about it. I'll send an email afterwards to reiterate where you need to go to pick up the report. And you get the report, and there will be a small series of emails afterwards that kind of help you dig more into that report so that you can actually implement what you've learned. And that is that. Thank thank you so much for your attention, and I will be ready for questions.
Thank you so much, Linda. We have a lot to cover. I'm going to quickly thank Play Attention once more for sponsoring today's webinar. And I want to highlight what you all told us were your biggest challenges. I know it was very annoying that we did not allow people to click all of the above in our poll question at the beginning, but we did that on purpose to give us a little bit more fine tune on where the challenges were. So the number one challenge cited by 29% of people was focusing consistently. So I'd like to make that the first question here. We've got a number of people who say, you know, again, yes, ADHD brains, creative geniuses. When the ADHD brain gets interested in something, it gets really interested in it. And people say they fall down rabbit holes and they lose track of time blindness, all of that. How can we help them to shift their focus and give equal focus to all of the things that need their focus, not just the things that are interesting to them?
I know what you mean. Ideally, you want to have a career or things that you love and you find interesting, and that's the majority of what you do in the daytime. But first things first is to plan. The number one issue with being able to get things done and staying focused is people are not planning, and being aware of your energy patterns. That's one other thing that will make a difference. Besides that, it's a challenging thing to fall into those rabbit holes. It's a tendency that most people have. You will want to have a specific amount of time that you're going to set, that you decide you're going to work on it. You need to have that task a lot more specific. I'll only work on this part of this. And I know it's hard to say, no, I'm going to stop now because I'm finished and my time is up. I need to move on to the next thing. But what I often tell people is, if you were planning on a weekly basis and you looked at all your project, you were being the CEO of your brain, of your life. You are making decisions that were informed around what needs to get done. And in the moment when you decide you want to stick to a particular task, even if you're not supposed to be doing it anymore, you're being a teenager, a rebellious teenager. And if you think about, right now, I'm going to get, it's going to be fun. It's going to continue to be fun. But if I'm thinking of my future self, I'm going to be in trouble. So thinking about your future self and how your future self will feel if you continue on the path that you're on right now. And it may mean also having alerts to keep you from staying too long in a task. It's a challenging problem, definitely.
Right. And you demonstrated some good tools with the timers today, right? Yep. Setting timers, body doubles can help to keep you on task. And I don't recall if you mentioned the Pomodoro method. I mean, this kind of ties in with the timers, but giving yourself that 20 to 40 minutes of defined time with the break, as you mentioned, that buffer time.
And I wouldn't necessarily leave it at 20 or 25 minutes. That's what the Pomodoro approach says, but you go with what works for you. Each person is different. When I'm focused on the task, and that's the other thing, is if you know you're going to be working on a task that requires a lot of focus, you may want to work on a longer period on that task than a bunch of short periods, because once you get into it, it's hard to get out. So you may want to, like, for example, if I'm creating a project or I'm writing, I may spend 2 hours of writing instead of chunking 30 minutes of writing and then 30 minutes of doing something else. And then I'm better off when I start especially during my Genius Zone, if I start a task like that and I give myself the time to get through more of that task than if I try to break it up. So Pomodoro works, but I wouldn't stick to 25 minutes and 5 minutes of break. I would do, the time that you need, that works for you. And then a break. During your break, take the time to celebrate what you just accomplished and celebrate how your future self will feel once you complete the next task that's on your list.
Okay. Wonderful. I wanted to touch on the second thing that our audience told us was the biggest challenge, second biggest challenge, prioritization.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yes. So, and a lot of people wrote in to say they have no problem making to-do lists, defining them, but it's figuring out the order of priority. And more than that, often those highest priority items are daunting. They are difficult to start. And we know that task initiation is an executive function challenge tied to ADHD. So that's more than one question in there, but
it is,
determining the priorities and then tricks and tips for getting started on those top priorities that are really overwhelming.
Okay. So the prioritization, I don't like the to-do list. I find it's a to-do book. It takes forever to prioritize between the 200 tasks that you probably have on your to-do list. And you're not being very realistic about what's possible. When I'm working with clients, we usually work on having projects instead. So those to-do lists can be broken into different projects. And those projects, then if you prioritize the projects, it becomes easier to prioritize the tasks that need to be done at any given time. If I've prioritized that my website needed to be done by now, by yesterday, for example, then I know that's the majority of the tasks that needed to be done. I knew that was a priority. The next project that this presentation was another one. So it made it very easy for me to determine what are the tasks that need to be done, because I prioritize projects first. So there's fewer projects than there are to-dos. And then once I prioritize those projects, is determining 1 to 3 tasks for each of the projects that I'm going to do this week. When it comes to getting started, especially those daunting things, one of the approaches that makes a huge difference, I will use BJ Fogg's approach for tiny habits. You can use the same approach for starting any task. First of all, if it's very daunting, it's not a task, break it down even more. And identify maybe one thing that you could do that leads into that task. It could be, I'm only going to work on it for 2 minutes, or I'm only going to open that particular presentation and work on the first slide, and that's it. And that way, just doing it for 2 minutes or 5 minutes is not difficult. I can deal with 5 minutes. Come on, I'm able to do that. So if you do 5 minutes, then you're a lot more likely to get started. Once you get started, then it's easy to get on with the show most of the time.
Mm-hmm. That's one of Newton's laws, right? A body in motion.
Absolutely, it stays in motion. And it's getting started that's often the challenge. It's really getting started. So starting small with a tiny little thing can get you in the right track.
Yes. And I'll just mention that a common challenge is this idea of procrastivity, that we pick these little busy tasks to fill our time, and suddenly, we're harried, we're working overtime, we're working at night, but those big priority things aren't getting done. So I really like that idea of the project.
Yeah, being clear on the project. And then procrastivity happens when the task is fuzzy. That's why if it's daunting, it's too fuzzy. Make it easier. If you need to, procrastivity happens when the task, you don't have a clue when it's going to be over. So you need to set a time if that's the challenge. So look at the task and say, okay, is it fuzzy? Do I know how long it's going to take? Do I know how to get started? What could be one tiny little thing that would get me started into it? And that will reduce the possibility of procrastivity, and you're more likely to do that priority task.
Okay, so I'm going to try and squeeze in our third most challenging aspect of ADHD and work, and that's organizing time. 19% of you said that was your biggest challenge. And we got a number of questions. Your time blocks were a great concept, but people are really struggling with how can they accurately estimate how much time it's going to take, because again, we know that time estimation is an executive function challenge associated with ADHD.
Totally. So you will not get it right the first time. That's why if you not only put in your time block, and I'll give you another approach that you could use. But when you're using those time blocks, after you're done with the particular task, create a second calendar. I very much believe in the Google Calendar or electronic calendars. You can create a calendar on top of the other, have a calendar that's the actual. And now you're collecting data, because that's one of the challenges that we have is we don't have a clue how long it took the last time we did it. So it's hard to be able to say, well, it's only going to take this long. The other thing is, if you have never done the task, or you have no clue how long it really will take, triple it. Triple how much it's going to take. You think it's going to take. Most people say, I'm never going to get anything done. Well, chances are you will probably be close to target. But if you aren't, hey, bonus, you've got some extra time to do something else. And in doing it, you will amass some data about how long it actually takes. The other thing is, a task that's a big challenge is sometimes a task, if you do it at certain times of the day, will take 5 minutes. At other times of the day will take an hour, and at other times of the day you're not going to be able to do it. Those are your energy patterns. So recognizing what kind of task it is it a short task or a long task that requires a lot of focus, or a physical task? And when is the best time for you to do it? That will make a massive difference. That's why it's part of one of the things that I'm training people on, because it is a major issue. How long does it take? It's hard to know, because sometimes you're focused and sometimes you're not, and you may have booked at the wrong time. So triple the amount of time you think it's going to take, and then capture how long it actually took, and that'll help you in the future.
Okay. Well, we are out of time for today. This was a lot of good information for all of those who asked during the live event. Yes, you can download the slides to refer to, and you can also replay this webinar. All of that information will come to you in an email just in a couple of hours. But for now, I just want to thank Linda for leading this talk for us today, this webinar, and for everyone who attended. And I hope that you all can attend more Attitude webinars in the future. We have one this Thursday, which is on a very different topic, but it is about eating disorders in teenagers with ADHD. And then on November 30th, another on genes and the environment, about how biology and exposures contribute to ADHD in children, with Dr. Joel Nigg. So to register for those and more, visit us at attitudemag.com/newsletters and sign up to receive those webinar alerts. But for now, thank you all for joining us, and we hope that you have a wonderful day.